afternoon, everybody. How's everyone doing? Good? Woo! Okay, I'm going to go ahead and say that we're going to break the flow of the presentation near the very end because the PowerPoint gods hate me. And so just close your eyes and we'll go and we'll transition into it. But I'm here today to talk to you about live operations in Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, Galaxy of Heroes is a mid to hardcore mobile character collection game with RPG progression elements. Say that 5 times fast. I was asked to talk originally about our live events and about what we do and how we do them. And the more I dug into it, the more the presentation originally started to look like, and here's this event that requires these characters and it yields X thing. And that wasn't really satisfying in the way that I had hoped that it would be. And so instead, after digging a bit more, I decided instead that it might be better to approach this as a post-mortem with a little bit of theory and philosophy, and then at the very end sort of touch on our mechanics and how we deploy sort of the solutions from this philosophy into the way that we make and design live events. And so, but before I spend 30 minutes just showing off my sweet key art, let's go ahead and hop in. And one of the things you're going to notice immediately in this presentation is the power of 3. Star Wars has a lot of trilogies, and so I thought it was pretty appropriate to also have the number 3 show up quite a bit. And so the way this talk is going to be lined out is that we're going to do some introductions. Who am I? Who sent me? What do they do? I'm going to talk about the product, Galaxy of Heroes itself. And then we're going to talk about the 3 fundamental pillars of the game and the 3 problems that come from those 3 fundamental pillars, and the 3 solutions to the 3 problems from the 3 fundamental pillars, and then the 3 mechanics to the 3 solutions to the 3 problems from the 3 fundamental pillars. Sort of a nesting doll of Star Wars-y goodness. So moving forward, if it will let me, I want to give a big shout out to my team more than anything else. These are the people that make Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes happen every day, all day, and some other like sports preppy stuff. But more than anything, for those of you up there, if I ruin this, I'm so sorry for besmirching your good names. So who am I? My name's Nick Reinhart. On the forums, I go by Top Hat. See that Vader with a top hat? That's me. My schooling background is that I have a BA in political science and an MA in international relations, which means I functionally have 2 holes in my head. And I also have an MS in statistics, which feels like a real degree, maybe. I did some unfun jobs for a long time, like a lot of them. But I think most recently, the most unfun was I worked in the oil industry, where I did compliance and logistics. And yes, it is that dismal. It is that dismal sounding. I also worked in the government, where I worked for the Agency for International Development on a joint task force with the State Department. That work was actually really cool. I worked on the Bureau for Europe and Eurasia desk, and we came up with some really cool things, but it was a little too slow and outside of my core competency, which is mainly playing video games. And so then I did some fun jobs. I started working as a data scientist, which is another job that's sort of made up. Data scientists make up a lot of models that no one looks at, but they do. And then you use like 1 or 2 of them, and they're pretty cool. But one of them we did use, and we'll talk about it later. I also worked as a product manager. And what a product manager inside of Electronic Arts is they're responsible for monetization design, balancing the economy, et cetera. But currently, I am a car salesman, also known as a live producer. And so what I do is I'm specifically in charge of the live game, meaning my team owns making the game feel fresh and alive every day. We accomplish this largely through releasing new characters, ships, and you guessed it, events. So here are all the other games that I've worked on. It's a lot. So take this with a grain of salt, all the things I'm saying. I know that I am new to the industry and what I do, but I hope that what I'm saying resonates with you all. So let me tell you a little bit about Capital Games. So Capital Games got established in 2008. You can see that there is a Mochi store in that picture. The development happened above the Mochi store. That's right. Back in the wild days of Facebook games, they were cranking out all sorts of crazy things. And so eventually, after having some success there, they moved into that middle picture, which is actually where we still currently reside to this day, which is Capital Games proper, although we're in the process of actually moving into a new building and starting another project. Because of the success in some of their Facebook games, most notably Superhero City, ClickNation was acquired by Electronic Arts in December 2011, where, if you do or do not remember, they released a game called Heroes of Dragon Age. And let's go ahead and take a look at some of those real quick. On the far left, that's Superhero City, and on the far right is Heroes of Dragon Age. Well, you could look at the far right picture because you can actually see so much of the DNA that's Galaxy of Heroes show up right there. But really what these games are mostly showing you is that the team as a whole has largely worked on RPG sort of core experiences for a very long time. And it's, in many ways, the studio is just a reflection of all those previous games that have come and gone. And Galaxy of Heroes is the culmination of that hopefully great experience. Yes, excellent, great experience. So let's go on. So let's talk about the product, and let's talk about Galaxy of Heroes more proper. So take a look at this picture and just close your eyes, let it come over you. There's this feeling that comes from watching a Star Wars movie that is difficult to describe, but we all know it. It's a sense of fantastic and wonder, and it goes beyond just watching the movies. Most of us probably have a cherished Star Wars memory. Mine, I'm from Alabama originally. It's an okay place. In the backwoods of Alabama, we're out tromping around in the woods, and me and my buddy, we're like trying to force lift a log so that we can prove to a stump, Yoda, that we could be Jedi. But in that same vein, so many of us grew up playing with the toys. And while this picture is clearly from the 70s, I'm willing to bet that most of us played with the toys. Galaxy of Heroes is an extension of that toy experience. It's a sandbox where you can mix and match your favorite characters and engage in epic battles. So it's no different than sitting down with the toys and saying, I wonder what would happen if Rey and Luke fought Count Dooku. I tend to think of even weirder ones like Jawa's, Rhoda Rancor. That feels pretty good. So, oh, there we go. So this is the game. These are some handy GIFs. As you recall from earlier, I described it as a mid to hardcore character collection game with RPG progression elements. I failed the 5 times fast on that. So you can think Final Fantasy style combat with mix and match Star Wars squads across factions and eras. Those factions and eras are represented on the characters as faction tags. So if you're a Stormtrooper, you have an Empire tag. If you're Plo Koon, you have a Jedi tag. But this isn't important now, but it will be important later, but just sort of put that in the back of your mind. So let's talk about the game as it stands today, or in today in sort of a broader sense. When we originally launched the game, we had 60 characters, we had several saga maps, we had asymmetrical PvP with rank swap, and we had a mode called Galactic War where we harvested PvP teams and served them up in sort of a PvE style a lineup. Now we have 170 characters. We have 40 ships. We've had 15 title updates. There's some argument amongst the team about what counts as a content update, but I think we've had about 150 of them. We release about every 2 weeks, and oftentimes in that every 2 weeks, it's a new character or it's a new event. It's definitely a new something. Some of the features we've released is we've released raids, we've released guilds, we've released territory battles. You can think play sets where you fight against a big environment using a bunch of characters, territory wars, that's guild versus guild, and Grand Arena, which is player versus player leveraging a wide amount of the collection. So let's start to dig into these 3 pillars that we were talking about. Man, this thing won't click over. There we go. So we're about to get started, and you're going to actually hear me regularly say, okay, here we go, but before we get started, so we can get a counter of it. But before we do, let's talk about the retrospective nature of the pillars of a live service. And the pillars of a live service, as we understand them, change as the game ages. So when we were 3 days out of launch, the pillars, as we would have evaluated them, would have been very different. Characters, that they happen, like it's just here, have them please. When we were 3 months out of launch, the pillars likely would be evaluated differently as well. How do we find, what is the value of having these characters, and sort of thinking about it in those terms. So what we're about to talk about right now is the pillars of the live service as we understand it right now, moving into our 4th year of service. So the 3 pillars, and this always, it feels like there should be like a Doric column or something. And we'll review each of them, but they basically boil down into an economy consideration, the inherent play incentive that comes from playing the game, and a player sentiment consideration as well. So, the first pillar, the durable economy. To talk about what a durable economy is, you have to talk about what is a consumable economy first. So a consumable economy is an economy where, and specifically speaking about characters, where you have characters that exist and other characters can absorb them and become more powerful. So your roster is more ephemeral or something that's a strategic resource to be leveraged, sort of the way to think of it. You can also have other parts of a consumable economy, potions that give you power or speed ups, things like that. But and while it's nuanced, the key difference between a consumable economy and the durable economy, and specifically our durable economy, is that the characters that you have in the game, they last in perpetuity. Everything you do to them is subject to the further perfection of that character, right? So now that said, there are things in the economy that aren't durable. For instance, like we have soft currencies, credits, experience points, etc. But at its core, the character is the most durable part of the economy, and subsequently the economy itself. So, sort of restated, this is a durable economy, not a consumable economy. Duh. Okay, second pillar, incremental progress. With durable characters, we made a core systems decision to have RPG-like gear and ability progression systems. Coupled with the durability of the character economy, this means that progress is slow and incremental. And you may say, oh, that sounds boring. But what we have found is that our players love that process of perfecting their characters. It's a key motivation and satisfaction. Furthermore, because of the incrementality, players oftentimes use words like, well, my Darth Vader is gear 8, or my Hermit Yoda is maxed on their abilities. This sense of ownership over the process is incredibly powerful. And what this means is that incremental progress is a key motivation and satisfaction. And the third pillar here is respect investments. So when players start developing a language of their Darth Vader, and as an outgrowth of the other two pillars, it becomes incredibly important to respect the time and effort that they put in advancing and crafting their characters. Changing a beloved ability or interaction can turn off players and make them not want to engage anymore. That's why if we do have to change something, we do our best to be transparent, and we try to have a well-reasoned answer as to why. And oftentimes we try to do our best to make it as positive as possible. We aren't perfect. I don't think that any game team can tackle this problem perfectly. But there's more on this later where I'm going to say some more mea culpas about it. But ultimately, rampant nerfing equals bad. Okay. So based on the above, at the game's core, the atomic unit of value, and this is really important, it's like the single building block, the atomic unit of value and fun in the game is the character. All considerations of time, effort, substitution, demand, is driven by characters, and characters relative to one another, their power synergistically, etc. So let's dive into what are the three problems that arrive from these decisions that we've made. If it will click. Will it click? Okay, talking about events. Not yet. But what we're going to talk about now are the three problems that come from it. And the first of these is power creep. You can see here, this is Supreme Leader Snoke's capital ship, the Supremacy. It's very big, very big. And it's so big, it dwarfs all other Star Destroyers that ever existed, right? It's like Death Star 1, Death Star 2, Starkiller Base. And that's fine. Like, things get bigger and they destroy more stuff. Very scary. But I think it's actually a really good analogy for games. So with a game that has such a focus on characters, power creep is necessarily going to occur. You launch a game with 60 characters, you have strong base combat and a good litany of buffs and debuffs. And over time, though, you can't just keep recycling the same abilities and buffs. You have to add something to enhance notability rotations, or even just throw in things just to flip it on its head. Managing that meta, that larger play experience of how all these characters interact together is critical, but that also means that you necessarily have to keep making it more interesting, and in keeping it more interesting, if you have a bunch of characters that are durable, how do you keep them all relevant? Can you keep them all relevant? So let's talk about too many toys, second problem. As you add more characters into a game, you need more and more ways to engage with the entire collection. Let's look at Darth Vader here. He's looking pretty boss. He's got his stormtroopers, and that's a pretty compelling fantasy there, right? I think all people, whether you're light side or dark side, have thought about like this sort of thing, right? I'm leading them into battle. It's super cool. So how do you keep a player interested or organized around having stormtroopers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? How do you keep them around wanting 5 and 6 and 7? And now layer in all the other troopers. You've got Shore Trooper, you've got Death Trooper, you've got Snow Trooper, you've got Range Trooper, and there are more, believe me. And then you also have General Veers, who's very good with stormtroopers. Great leader, dies in an AT-AT. Now, later on, you have to collect all these toys, but then you also have to be able to show them all off. So with 170 characters, this is a real problem for us. How do you get players to engage with the toys and not let them collect dust on the shelf? And our third problem is preventing nerfs. Now, I just said respect investments, but we can respect them, but sometimes things go wrong, right? In fact, if you are a player of the game, you will notice last week we announced we were making some changes to some beloved characters and their interactions, HK-47 being most notable of them. Preventing nerfs is easier said than done. Because of the expanding size of the roster, the number of interactions between characters grows exponentially. And over time, there are plenty of things that either A, are interactions that we could never have accounted for no matter how much testing we do, or B, are abilities that made sense at the time of their release, but maybe deserve a second look, or maybe don't make as much sense in the way the game has like progressed. You know, going back to this idea of the retrospective live service, that's an important part of it, right? You may have made a decision in the past, but you have to be open and willing to sort of till it. But in tilling it, you invite some snakes and some other scary things to maybe come after you. So the problem for us is, how do you prevent nerfs? Or if you do have to nerf, how do you make it as positive as possible? Okay, so let's talk about 3 solutions. Not events yet, but soon. Solution number 1 for us is called managing diversity. So you have all these characters, and they all do different things, and they've all been released at various parts of the game's life cycle, meaning some characters are newer and perhaps more powerful, and some characters are older and perhaps less powerful. So you could just let the characters exist where they are, with many of them being edged out over time. And at this point, you're considering a practical roster versus an actual one, or stated another way, how many characters are actually used versus how many actually exist. And if you think back to our problem statements, this fits under like all the headings: too many toys, power creep, and in some ways preventing nerfs. So if you instead recontextualize designing characters and as an ecosystem, you can instead think of them as animals filling very specific ecological niches, instead of all of them being apex predators at the time that they exist, right? Or in some instances, one apex predator that everything else is fodder. So similar to our pond up there, we think it becomes a more interesting problem and one with some interesting gameplay impacts for how you design and develop inside of it. Now, the character discussion becomes, when you think about it as an ecosystem, which characters beat which other characters in PvP? Which characters are useful in one mode or another? What places can we create that these characters shine and that you feel good for using them regularly? And if some characters have been edged out by power creep, then maybe we can target them for an update and flip the ecosystem. Like literally say, oh, Shore Trooper, Death Trooper, they just need Range Trooper and they'll be much better. And all the while, we're still introducing new creatures into the system. So it's constantly evolving and changing, which for a live operation, I think that's really the most exciting part, right? That the game is not static, that it changes all the time. So as such, we've even gone so far as to use biodiversity measurements and statistics to analyze our game and to think about all the different characters and the ways in which players use them and where they use them. So we seek to manage the diversity of the system rather than consider it from one local optimum to the next, one character to the next. This manifests as creating events that are unique to certain characters, areas of the game where some characters perform best, reworking old characters, and introducing new characters that revitalize old groups. Back to this idea of nesting utility. So we're back, Star Wars stuff. When we sit down to release a character, we oftentimes work backwards from the place where we release a high affinity game-changing character and think about all the other stuff that has to go along with it. And so the example I oftentimes use here is Commander Luke Skywalker. You know him as Luke with lightsaber and beige fatigues, but Empire Strikes Back Luke. So we looked at ourselves and we said, it'd be super cool to put this Luke into the game. But what do we think players want to do? Well, they probably want to put Luke with his friends. Princess Leia, Han Solo. Okay, so those characters, they're old. We're going to have to do some work around them to make sure that that's fun, right? Oh, but wait a second. Luke is missing his best buddy, R2-D2. Okay, well, let's make a kit for R2-D2 and let's put him in the game and he's going to do well with Luke. But wait a second. R2 is a big deal, right? Like you can't just release R2-D2, and you have to create some sort of aspiration. Having R2 is a mark of honor, a badge, that you've done something great in the game. Okay, well, so who's looking for R2? The Empire. Okay, we've got these faction tags we talked about earlier. So now, okay, so you need the Empire is looking for R2-D2 for the plans for the Death Star. Let's make Empire characters get R2-D2. Okay, well, let's go look at the Empire characters. Okay, they're old and not so great too. Not the Empire itself, but our abilities, our old school abilities for them aren't as good as they used to be. Okay, so now we need to rework the Empire as well. So now it goes, Empire characters need to be reworked, and then we release R2-D2, and then you get R2-D2, and then Luke's friends get reworked, and then we ask for you to have all of them to get Luke. That sounds like a content roadmap. That sounds like a way in which we can release characters to light up the entire amount of the people's rosters and collections as they go through. And that actually was what we did. That is one of our very successful ones, but it's also, in many ways, it's the spine. It's the spine of a content roadmap, right? Players can sense and see it once you start showing it to them. Hey, like they've got bigger plans here, and the things that I'm doing now roll up into things that are going to happen later. And by being able to show that time and time again, they sort of they stick around to see what that experience looks like. So in many ways, we think of that as it's a year's worth of content, and we've created an interesting game story as players follow along. Okay, so let's talk about solution number 3, authenticity. And I'm going to go ahead and preface that I'm lucky to work on a Star Wars game, and not everybody has the IP of Star Wars. But I do think the result here, and especially if you just watch the Candy Crush talk, I think it shows that it generalizes, that the IP, that story that's told, is important. We exist in what we think of as an enviable state. Star Wars, as we talked about earlier with the toys, is a story that is very well understood. And in many ways, we get to leverage our audience's nostalgia for characters that they love to serve them the content that we believe they will love. All of the characters in Star Wars have relationships between one another, so we get ready-made play interaction. So from Rogue One, Chirrut and Baze, they're best friends, they're life bonded. Their character abilities actually reference one another. If Chirrut is present, if Baze is present. Back to that idea of the troopers. From Empire Strikes Back, we have General Veers, a commander of Imperial Trooper who provides powerful synergies for all troopers. This boils down to abilities that reference other characters having factions they are a part of with game-relevant outcomes. We aren't telling any new stories in Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. What we are doing, though, is remembering them, which we think the fans really like. Okay, a lot of talk about characters. But I hope that you can understand that this is it goes back to that idea of the character as the atomic unit of value, right, and fun. And that you really can't have a conversation about how you do anything else in the game without first considering the way that characters fit into it. I've been describing how we use events to release characters, how you need other characters to gain access into events. The character ultimately serves the value and the fun of the game. And so for us, you can talk about the events and what all we do with them, but you first have to talk about characters. You have to be very mindful of that. Okay, so one more before we get started. One more. I want to make just a technical note, but it's one that should be made, in that we think of our live events portfolio as covering both our feature events, quotations, things that require significant engineering, and our regular events. And those are ones where the system is well understood, the designers can easily implement inside of it, they can just hop in and do some XML and attach assets to. The reason we think of both of them as a part of the live events portfolio is because the daily excitement of having different experiences turn on and off is something that has to be managed and can be optimized to provide what is hopefully the ideal player experience. So as we talk about our mechanics and our event design, bear in mind I'm talking about both large and small scale events, and that they are relatively equal in our mind, all part of the day-to-day mix of experiences in Galaxy of Heroes. Okay, so you can draw a pretty straight line between managing utility and managing diversity here. What we mean by that is that I said, let's create a niche in the ecosystem, right? Well, events are a very easy way for us to do that. You can think of the pond as a metaphor for a bunch of events, and that different characters fit into that where they are very good or not so good in some other places. So we regularly use our events to create a home for languishing characters, upcoming characters, or characters we don't even know about yet. Well, I mean, we know about them, but they don't exist yet. So up there to the far left and on the far right, you can see the Rancor and the AAT. Those are two raids. And the middle one is for our playset battle, the Battle of Hoth. The Battle of Hoth requires Rebels and Empire characters. And the Rancor and AAT, the raids, early on, there was a really novel Ewok Jedi squad that could best the Rancor, and whereas before, the Jedi and Ewoks weren't doing so great. So the mechanics of designing events to manage utility is twofold. It can give us a direction on how we design and rework characters, such as let's make this character good for a raid. It can also be a place to show off the vast roster of characters that exist with requirements. Next, second mechanic is faction gating, which I actually described perfectly earlier with R2-D2, but more broadly stated or defined, nesting utility is using specific groups of characters to get something in game. Credits, mods, other characters, etc. So R2-D2 gets you Luke. You can see there in the middle there's Chewbacca. Chewbacca is always being chased by bounty hunters. Take some bounty hunters, get some Chewbacca. But we use faction gating even outside of just unlocking characters. Scoundrels steal credits, the Empire fights Ewoks, the Jedi fight Sith, and those all yield rewards as well. So in doing so, we can light up different parts of the player's collection regularly and make their toys feel special in the context they are being used. And in using an event structure, we believe we can keep the experience novel by requiring different things on different days. And finally, let's talk about telling a story. I want to reiterate that we do not tell any new stories in Galaxy of Heroes, but we do lean into the stories that have been told. So wherever we can, we use our events to make nods to the stories that have been told, and in some instances, create retellings of stories with the characters that exist in the game. Above, you can see the panel art from our Journey event type. That's Jedi Knight Revan, that's Rey, and that's Luke Skywalker. We just announced Darth Revan, who's coming soon. The details of the requirements of this event type isn't really that important. What's more important is that we acknowledge that there is a broader universe, and that universe is something our players want to engage with as often as they can and as deeply as they can. So ultimately, our game enables fans to experience the full breadth and depth of the Star Wars universe through holotables set in a cantina. We never tell the players where they are or when they are, so we can always bring new Star Wars content into the game without messing with the narrative timelines. And this is where I had some really sweet transitions that all broke. So we're going to pause for a second. Yes, that's Ronald Reagan riding a velociraptor.
Statement. This should be fun. Observation. Now that is the master I remember.
That's a trailer for our latest event, and you can see even just across all of the language, it's about remember, relive, remember the story that was told. So we embrace that wholeheartedly, and it's a really important part of the way that we make the game. So what I want to do now is, of course, go to the... Cool, this is neat. I am not taking questions right now, but I will catch you guys in the lounge. But I do want to make sure, since I've used up all the time available, that I leave my email address. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me at my email address. That ended terribly. I besmirched the good name of my people. Thank you, everybody, for your patience and everything else.